The air in Carolina was thick with dust, shining under the late afternoon sun. Fort Bragg's firing range was loud, with rifle bolts clicking, targets clanging, and the low chatter of new soldiers who hadn't learned to be quiet yet. Through this noise, Sergeant Leah Monroe walked. She was slender and calm, her hood pulled low against the bright light. A faint line of black ink marked her neck. Small, exact numbers, coordinates. Whispers started before she even reached the firing line. Her ex's house, one recruit joked. Maybe her favorite nail salon. Another added, loud enough for laughter to spread. Even a few teachers smiled behind their glasses. It was a casual kind of disrespect that faded quickly but stung deeply. Monroe said nothing. She fixed her rifle strap, brushed sand from her sleeve and kept moving. Through her mirrored glasses, the range seemed to stretch forever. Targets waited like silent judges. Her eyes stayed steady. No anger showed, just the quiet calm of someone who had faced hard times before, far from home, and already knew herself. Before we continue, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories to never miss these true tales of bravery. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Sergeant Leah Monroe did not look like the legendary figure people talked about in bars and meeting rooms. She looked like a tired instructor on just another long day at the Fort Bragg range. Her uniform was the same worn green as everyone else's, faded by sand and time. Only her posture and eyes stood out. She moved with the quiet balance of someone who had carried heavy loads over many miles, and her gaze never drifted. It watched, weighed, and understood. At 34, Leah was older than most of the recruits in front of her. She had been a combat sniper in Iraq, working on streets where every window could hide danger and every shadow could mean goodbye. Her radio name back then was Phantom 6, a name that meant nothing to the young men around her. Now, to them, she was just another Army sergeant with a clipboard and a rifle. The numbers tattooed on her neck drew more notice than her rank. Black ink, neat digits etched in a straight line just above her collar. No dates, no names, no reason. When the wind briefly lifted her hood, the numbers seemed to flash like a secret code no one cared to figure out. "Here she comes again," Staff Sergeant Reed Lawson mumbled, nudging the soldier beside him. Lawson was younger, taller, with the easy confidence of someone who had always done well. "Our mystery map," the soldier smirked. "Maybe it's the mess hall's address. She looks like she lives there." Lawson grinned. It wasn't cruel, just thoughtless. He didn't see himself as rude. To him, it was just range chatter. The kind of talk that made long days pass quicker. He had never seen what true silence felt like. Up on the small hill overlooking the firing line, Commander Cole Harrison watched the exchange with a little amusement. A Navy SEAL in his early 40s with strong shoulders under his tan shirt. He had arrived 2 nights earlier to watch a joint sniper test between his SEAL candidates and the Army's best. He had expected a tough master sergeant or an experienced warrant officer leading the range. Instead, he had been introduced to Sergeant Leah Monroe, an Army sniper instructor. A sergeant leading SEAL evaluation week. Harrison hadn't said anything in the briefing room, but the question lingered in his mind like a pebble in his shoe. He didn't doubt Army snipers could shoot well. He doubted the leader's choice to put this particular one in front of his men. Down on the gravel, Monroe walked the line with careful steps. She checked rifle rests, scopes, and magazines. Her gloved hand dusted off bipods and adjusted legs with quick, practiced moves. She didn't waste words. If something was wrong, she fixed it. If something was right, she said nothing. "Sergeant," Harrison called from behind the glass of the small tower. "How are things looking?" She lifted her eyes briefly, her cap shading her face. "Targets are ready. Wind is moving left to right about 8 miles an hour. I briefed them." Her voice was soft but steady, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Harrison gave a small nod that felt more like a challenge than approval. Near the middle of the line, a young trainee fumbled with his magazine. His hands shook just enough for bullets to rattle. Monroe watched from a few feet away, arms crossed. She could have stepped in early. Instead, she waited, letting him struggle long enough to feel the pressure, but not long enough for panic to set in. When his first 3 shots missed widely, kicking up dust far from the steel, the snickers started. Lawson shook his head in an exaggerated way. If he shoots any wider, he's going to hit the parking lot. Monroe walked over, her boots crunching on empty shells. She didn't look at Lawson. She knelt beside the trainee, her knee pressed into the dirt next to his elbow. Grip, she said softly. Breath, trigger, 3 words. No lecture, no raised voice. She moved his right hand just a little, rolled his shoulder forward, and placed 2 fingers against his ribs. Breathe with the, don't fight them. The trainee swallowed and nodded. He aimed again. The range noise faded in his ears, narrowing to the slow rise of his chest and the feel of her hand. He squeezed. The shot cut through the warm air, sharp and clean. A moment later, the steel target rang out loud and clear. There was a short pause, almost too quick to notice. The kind of silence that comes when people realize something didn't go as they expected. Then someone mumbled, "Lucky shot." Another said, "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Lawson forced a laugh that sounded weaker than before. Monroe stood without a word and moved away, going to the next firing spot. She didn't look back at the trainee's surprised face or the way his shoulders straightened. From the tower, Harrison leaned forward in his chair. He had been watching through a scope, more from habit than interest. Now he adjusted the view, following Monroe as she moved along the line. Her corrections were small, precise. She tapped a barrel down here, adjusted a cheek rest there. And each time, the results got better. "Interesting," he whispered. Behind him, Captain Mark Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching the same scene. Vance wore the insignia of a company commander, but the way he had greeted Monroe that morning wasn't typical. It had been quieter, almost respectful. Harrison had noticed, he just hadn't asked. "You know her?" Harrison asked now, keeping his voice casual. Vance's jaw tightened for a moment. "Long enough," he said. "She knows what she's doing." Harrison waited for more, but nothing came. The answer wasn't dodging, it was protecting. He kept that thought to himself and looked back at the range. Down below, Lawson couldn't let it go. As Monroe passed behind his firing point, he raised his voice just enough for others to hear. "Hey, Sergeant, does that ink of yours ever point to anything cool, or is it just a drawing?" A few men chuckled. Someone else added, "Maybe it's the mall's coordinates. She looks like she knows where the sales are." Monroe's step didn't change. She kept walking, eyes forward. The only sign she had heard them was a brief, almost absent lift of her hand to the back of her neck, fingers touching the edge of the numbers as if checking they were still there. Captain Vance's gaze hardened. He opened his mouth, then closed. Leah had been through far worse than silly jokes on a safe range. She could handle herself. Still, a tight feeling settled in his chest. The rest of the afternoon played out in a familiar rhythm for everyone but Leah. Shots fired, targets hit or missed, commands called, laughter rising and falling like waves. Through it all, her presence stayed the same, a steady line drawn through the noise. She moved with patience that didn't rush and authority that didn't shout. Rules met rudeness again, and every time she chose the same response: fix the mistake, ignore the ego, keep the range safe. Most of the men just saw an instructor doing her job. They didn't see the way her eyes quickly checked every flag for wind, every heat shimmer on the horizon, every small detail that could turn a calm day deadly if this were anywhere else. They didn't know there had been a time when those numbers on her neck weren't a joke, but the only thing she had left of someone she loved. They didn't know her secret name, not yet. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped low enough to make the range glow with copper light and long shadow. Heat rippled above the sandbags, blurring the distant trees. Commander Cole Harrison stood with his arms crossed at the base of the tower, his voice carrying across the yard. "You can watch from up top, Sergeant. Let the men handle the range." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal wrapped in politeness. Monroe's expression didn't change. She simply said, "Yes, sir," and climbed the narrow steps to the observation deck. From there she could see everything. The lines of shooters, the strong wind pulling at flags, the faint heat haze bending the air near the steel targets half a mile away. She lifted her binoculars, noticing each man's stance, finger control and breathing. Then over the radio she offered calm corrections. "Shooter 3, adjust 1 click left. Shooter 6, hold a half mil high." No one replied. Down below, rifles roared, Dust rose and metal targets remained silent. Harrison leaned against the tower rail, pretending not to notice. He said something into his own radio, his voice lighter, almost teasing. "We'll get it, Sergeant. You just keep watching." The next shots went wide again. She pressed her mic button once more. "Wind is picking up. Read your flags. Heat haze is pulling left." Silence answered her. The only sounds were the crack of rifles and the frustration building in each man's shoulders. By sunset, the targets looked untouched. Most rounds had made small marks on the dirt mounds, but not one clear hit echoed across the field. Lawson finally slammed his rifle down. "Maybe next time we let the tattoo girl shoot." The line broke into laughter. It wasn't happy laughter. It was relief, the kind that hides shame behind noise. Even Harrison managed a thin smile. Up in the tower, Monroe slowly let out her breath. She set the binoculars down, took off her cap, and rubbed the back of her neck where the tattoo sat. Black ink against pale skin, the one thing no rank or teasing could erase. Then she went down the tower. The range grew quiet as her boots touched the gravel. She didn't speak, didn't look at anyone, just walked through the dusty air until she reached Lawson's rifle on the ground. Without a word she knelt, checked the chamber and aimed down the range. The world seemed to hold its breath. One squeeze, a single crack broke the quiet, sharp and easy. Half a mile away the steel target sang, a deep, clear clang that echoed against the hills. Heads turned, even the wind seemed to pause. Monroe stood, placed the rifle gently back beside Lawson, and looked at him once, steady, unreadable. Then she turned and started walking toward the gear table. The laughter didn't return. Harrison's jaw tightened. His pride felt bruised by the quiet display. "Lucky shot," he said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The wind doesn't do luck, sir." The line froze again, half in awe, half in shame. When she reached the bench, she unloaded a spare rifle and began cleaning it as if nothing had happened. Every move was calm, mechanical, careful. The others returned to their spots, shooting again. But now, between every shot, they glanced her way. Harrison watched her through narrowed eyes. There was no boastfulness in her stance, no pride, just focus. That made him more uneasy than any show of pride could have. As darkness fell, the range lights came on. Targets now rang not by chance, but from careful adjustments, quiet proof that her earlier calls had been right all along. Yet not one man said it aloud. Dinner came late. The mess tent buzzed with low voices and the clink of metal trays. The smell of instant coffee and warmed-up food filled the air. Lawson sat with a group near the projector screen, grinning as someone showed old black and white photos of female snipers from past wars. "Look at this. Soviets used to send women to shoot." "Guess history repeats itself," one joked. The others laughed. Someone dimmed the lights, making the images glow larger against the tent wall. At a table near the back, Monroe sat alone, quietly eating. She didn't look up once. Captain Mark Vance, passing by with a cup of coffee, stopped near her table. He looked toward the screen, then back at her. "You okay, Sergeant?" he asked softly. She nodded without looking up. "I've seen worse, sir." He hesitated, wanting to say more, then simply replied, "I know," and walked away. The laughter at the other table grew louder, the projector clicking through slides like a drum of mockery. Every image became another thoughtless jab, another reminder that respect and uniform weren't guaranteed even at home. Monroe finished her food, folded her napkin, and stood. As she passed the wall, the next image flashed. A female sniper crouched behind rubble, face partly hidden, rifle in her hands. The angle of the photo, the faint scar near the jawline, it was her. For a moment, no one spoke. The realization hadn't sunk in yet. Then the next slide replaced it, and the laughter started again. She kept walking out into the night air, past the tents toward the empty range, still echoing with distant clangs. Above her, stars began to appear in the Carolina sky. She tilted her head up, her eyes unreadable, and touched the numbers on her neck, the mark everyone made fun of, but no one understood. Back inside, Harrison watched from the tent doorway. The laughter had died down, but guilt hadn't taken its place yet. He followed her with his eyes until she disappeared into the dark. He didn't know why that image on the wall, the one he'd seen for half a second, felt so familiar. But something inside him stirred. A question he didn't want to ask. Tomorrow, he told himself, I'll find out who Sergeant Leah Monroe really is. Thunder rolled low across Fort Bragg like distant cannon fire. Rain lashed the metal roofs, running in silver streams through the gravel paths between barracks. Power flickered, lights blinking across the camp in a rhythm that made the night feel alive. Inside the armory, the emergency lights hummed with a faint yellow glow. Rows of rifles hung in perfect order, their metal catching every flash of lightning. Monroe sat at a bench near the back, sleeves rolled up, taking apart a rifle piece by piece with the care of a watchmaker. Each movement was a quiet, measured ritual. Commander Harrison stood near the far wall waiting for the generator to stabilize. The wind howled outside, and for the first time that week, the range was silent. His eyes wandered along the display cases that lined the armory, plaques, awards, photographs from decades of training history. Then he saw it, a narrow wooden case half hidden under dust, its brass nameplate dull and old. He leaned closer. Inside was a single worn folder labeled in faded ink, Fallujah Phantom 6. For a long moment, he didn't move. The name sat in his head like an echo. He'd heard it once before, years back during a joint mission in Iraq. A sniper call sign talked about in briefings, whispered with the kind of respect usually saved for legends. He turned slightly. At the far end of the room, Monroe was still at her bench, cleaning the bolt of her rifle. Lightning flashed again, lighting the edge of her profile, calm, distant, focused. Harrison paused. Did you ever serve overseas, Sergeant? Monroe didn't look up. Once or twice. He nodded slowly. Ever hear of a sniper they called Phantom? Her hands stopped for just a second, just enough for him to notice, then kept moving. Can't say I have, sir. She put the rifle back together, checked the chamber and placed it back in the rack. The movement was smooth. Conversation closed. The power flickered again, plunging them both into brief darkness. When the lights returned, the folder was still there, and Monroe was already walking out into the rain. Harrison stayed behind, staring at that old label. The storm outside hid his thoughts, but the question remained. What was she hiding? The next morning the air was clear but heavy with the smell of wet earth. Trainees lined up from morning drills, yawning, stretching, telling jokes that fell flat after the tension of the night before. Monroe passed quietly between them, a clipboard under one arm. Captain Mark Vance was coming from the command tent when he saw her. He stopped mid-step, stood straighter, and to the surprise of everyone watching, saluted. "Morning, Sergeant." She nodded once. "Morning." Then she kept walking, her boots leaving small marks in the damp sand. Lawson blinked, whispering to the man beside him. Did he just salute her? The other shrugged. She's a sergeant. He's a captain. He doesn't have to. Lawson frowned. Then, before he could finish, Vance answered without turning around. His tone was calm but final. Some people earn respect in different ways. No one spoke after that. From that day forward, a subtle change began. The teasing didn't disappear, but it lost its sting. Every time Monroe passed, conversations lowered slightly, as if people weren't sure whether to laugh or salute. That afternoon, the sky opened up again, a second storm sweeping across the bay. During the heavy rain, Monroe was seen near the memorial wall, a slab of polished black stone that gleamed under the water. She stood alone, her hood pulled low, one hand against the cold surface. Her fingers traced a single engraved name, Corporal Ethan Monroe. A few yards away, Harrison stopped mid-step when he saw her. The same last name, the same stillness. Lightning flashed overhead, and for a brief moment, he could see the numbers inked on her neck, coordinates shining in the rain. When she lowered her hand, he noticed her thumb stopped on one particular set of digits on the wall. Later, when the storm cleared, he'd remember them and check the records. They matched the label on that dusty Fallujah folder. She turned slightly, catching him watching. Their eyes met across the distance, and for once, neither spoke. She simply adjusted her hood and walked away, her boots splashing through the puddles. Behind her, whispers were already starting among the younger trainees. Who was that name? Her brother made. Why would someone tattoo coordinates of a grave? The rumor spread like smoke, not mean this time, but curious, unsure. Words like Iraq, Fallujah, Sniper and Phantom 6 floated between bunks and hallways. By evening, even Lawson had stopped joking. He just watched her move through the mess tent, quiet and deliberate. Every action clean, controlled, like someone who'd already been through hell and didn't need to prove anything ever again. Harrison caught Vance outside after dinner. That folder last night, Fallujah Phantom. It's hers, isn't it? Vance didn't deny it. He just looked toward the range lights flickering in the distance. You wanted to know who she is, he said. You're starting to. And before walking off, he added quietly, be careful how you find out. Some stories aren't told because they're too heavy to carry twice. That night, as wind whispered through the compound, and the last of the storm faded, the lights in Monroe's room stayed on long after the others had gone dark. Inside, she sat at her desk, a folded photo in her hand. Two soldiers standing in desert sand, smiling in sun-faded uniforms. One was her, the other was Ethan. She ran her thumb across the coordinates beneath their boots, the same ones marked on her skin. Outside, the whispers grew into questions, and the questions grew into quiet respect. No one mocked the tattoo anymore. They just wanted to know what it meant and who exactly the woman they'd laughed at truly was. The storm rolled back in the next day, as if it had unfinished business. Dark clouds piled over the treeline, and the air turned heavy and electric. On the schedule, the last block of training still held its place in black ink. Lev Fire Stress Simulation, final event for the week. Harrison thought about canceling. He stood at the edge of the range, studying the sky, feeling the low rumble under his boot. Then he looked at his watch, looked at the gathered candidates already suited up and eager, and shook his head. We run it, he said. Weather is weather. Combat doesn't reschedule. Monroe was already moving along the line, checking ear protection, eye protection, and rifles. Her voice carried just enough to be heard over the wind. Check your safety, confirm your target lanes only. No crossfire. If you lose sight, you stop. The simulation was made to copy chaos without being truly stupid. Targets would move, with pop-up figures and shifting steel. Smoke machines would add haze. Loudspeakers would blast sounds of gunfire and shouting. It was meant to shake nerves, to show who could think clearly with their heart pounding. When the first crack of thunder rolled closer, Monroe glanced up, reading the sky the same way she read the flags on a calm day. She walked over to Harrison. We can shorten the exercise, sir, she said quietly. Do the main drills and get them off before the worst of it. He heard the worry in her voice, and mistook it for fear. They're training to be special forces, he replied. They can handle a little noise from above. Her jaw tightened, but she simply nodded. Understood. The drill began. Smoke drifted across the range as the first group of shooters moved through their lanes, hitting targets as ordered. Loudspeakers came alive with fake incoming fire and shouted commands. Rain started as a fine mist, turning the dirt into a slick mess under their boots. At first it went well. Shots landed. Steel rang. Instructors called corrections over the radios. Monroe stayed near the center, headset on, tracking each lane and checking angles. Her face was calm, but her eyes missed nothing. Then lightning it hit somewhere beyond the dirt wall, close enough that the flash turned the world white for a moment. The thunder followed instantly, a violent crack that shook chests and sent a shock through the entire line. One of the trainees, a former infantryman, who had seen his share of bomb blasts, froze mid-step. The sound didn't register as thunder in his mind. It became something else entirely. His rifle dropped low, his eyes empty, staring past the targets into a memory no one else could see. He fell to his knees, hands over his head, gasping, "Incoming, incoming," over and over. The radios burst to life. Someone shouted that a shooter was down. Another voice demanded to know who had fired out of their lane. Harrison tried to sort it out, barking into his headset. Maintain formation. Stay on your targets. Keep moving. But the storm didn't care about his orders. The wind picked up hard, driving rain sideways. Another bolt of lightning sliced across the sky, followed by another crack of thunder. One trainee flinched and swung his rifle too far. An instructor grabbed the barrel, forcing it down, shouting for a ceasefire that half the line didn't hear. In seconds, awareness of the situation began to crumble. Harrison's attention jumped from one problem to another. The radios filled with many overlapping reports. Someone yelled about a gun nearly pointing at someone. Another demanded a medic for the panicked trainee now curled in the mud. Shaking, the simulation they had built to imitate chaos had become dangerously close to the real thing. Monroe watched all of it happen at once. She saw eyes losing focus, fingers gripping triggers too tightly, instructors trying to be everywhere at the same time. Something inside her settled. She stepped forward into the rain, lifted her headset mic, and let years of combat sharpen her voice. "All stations, this is Monroe," she called, her tone clear and firm. "Cease fire, repeat. Cease fire, cease fire, safety's on. Muzzles down, instructors confirm." There was something in her tone, not loudness, but authority, the kind that comes from being obeyed under far worse conditions. One by one the reports came in. Lane 1 safe, Lane 2 safe, Lane 3 safe. The gunfire stopped and started, then halted completely. The speakers still crackled with simulated chaos, but her voice cut through it like a clean "Corpsman to Lane 5, she added, already moving toward the trainee on his knees. "Everyone else maintain position until cleared. Do not move without an instructor." Harrison turned to look at her. It hit him then that he had never heard her speak that way before. Not on the range, not in the meetings. This was not Instructor Leah Monroe. This was something older, sharper, someone who had directed real firing under a sky full of real danger. She reached the panicked trainee first. Dropping to one knee beside him, she kept her voice low but strong. "You are at Fort Bragg," she said. "You are in training. There is no incoming. Look at me." His breathing came in short, rough gasps. Rain ran down his helmet and nose, mixing with sweat. His hands shook so hard he could barely focus. She took hold of his wrist, helping him feel present. "Count my fingers," she ordered. "One breath for each. In, out. You are here. You are not over there. Hear the rain. Smell the dirt. That is this place. Stay with it." Slowly the wild look in his eyes began to soften. He focused on her face, on the calm steadiness that didn't flinch with the next rumble of thunder. When the corpsman arrived, she helped move him, then stood, looking along the line again. "All lanes safe, all weapons cleared." Came the final radio call. "Copy," she replied. "Instructors, guide your shooters off the line. Range is cold." There was no confusion now. No one questioned who was in charge. Her commands moved through the group like wind through grass. Unseen but clear. Harrison watched, his headset forgotten around his neck. This was what Vance had hinted at. This was why the captain had saluted a sergeant in front of everyone. Once the line was clear, and the trainees were moving toward the covered waiting area, Monroe checked the roster board, hanging from the tower wall. Her eyes moved row by row, counting names, remembering faces. One was missing. "Where is Carter?" she asked. An instructor frowned. "He was in lane 8. He came off the line." She scanned the groups again. No Carter. No tall, thin build. No nervous fidgeting with his chin strapped. The rain pounded harder, turning the range into a gray curtain. Beyond the dirt wall, visibility dropped to almost nothing. "He is not here," she said. There was no panic in her voice, just fact. "He left his position. I am going." Harrison stepped in. "We will send a team. By the time you put one together, he could be halfway to the tree line," she replied. "He has combat history. Lightning plus live fire plus old memories is a bad mix. He could be hiding or worse, moving blindly. I know how they think when it hits like that." He hesitated for only a sec, then he nodded. "You go. Take a radio." She grabbed a handheld radio, pulled her hood tight, and stepped back out into the storm. From under the tower awning, Harrison lifted his binoculars and tried to follow her. Wind drove sheets of rain across the field, hiding everything beyond the first dirt mound. She moved low and fast, cutting between cover points with the instinct of someone who had done it under real fire. She checked behind the first mound. Nothing. She signaled back toward the tower, though he could barely see her hand. Then she pushed on,
her boots slipping in the mud, her uniform soaking through in seconds. At the second mound, she found him. Carter was huddled against the packed earth, helmet off, eyes squeezed. His hands were clamped over his ears, shoulders shaking. Whatever the lightning had brought back in him was still roaring too loud to let reality through. Monroe didn't approach from directly in front of.
She circled, coming into his side vision slowly, hands visible, posture low and not threatening. "Carter," she called over the rain. "It is Sergeant Monroe. You are at Bragg. Look at me." He flinched at her voice, then blinked, trying to focus. "Listen," she continued. "There is no fire, no blast, just rain. Feel it. That is now. The rest is memory. Do not let it drag you back. I need you here." He swallowed, choked, and nodded in tiny jerks. She stepped closer, took hold of his gear and pulled him up. He was dead weight at first, then slowly began to stand on his own legs. Together, they moved back across the field. Every few steps, his knees threatened to give out, and every time she tightened her grip and pulled him forward. Mud soaked her pants. Water ran down her sleeves and under her collar, past the numbers etched into her skin. From the tower, Harrison watched through blurry glass and fogged lenses. The details were lost, but the picture was clear enough. One figure pulling another through the storm, refusing to let him fall, alone on a range that suddenly seemed much closer to a place he had only seen on blurry drone videos. By the time they reached the waiting area, Carter's breathing had steadied. Monroe guided him to a bench, handed him off to the corpsman again, and only then let herself breathe out. No one clapped. No one made a joke. They just watched. Later, in the gear room, the storm's roar faded to a steady drumming against the metal roof. Trainees and instructors hung wet vests, laid out rifles to dry, and tried to shake off what had just happened. Monroe stood at a small table near the back, peeling off her soaked uniform shirt. Underneath, her tan undershirt clung to her skin, darkened by rain. She rolled up one sleeve to wring out the water, and that was when Lawson saw them. Faint, pale lines along her forearm, not neat scars from a knife or accident. Clustered, uneven marks that followed no smooth surgeon's pattern. The kind that came when metal and heat and debris met flesh in an instant no one forgets. He stared, mouth half open. That's shrapnel, isn't it?" he asked quietly. She glanced at him once, then at her arm. Her expression did not change. "Old business," she said. "Your rifle, Lawson. Focus on what's in your hands." He swallowed and picked up his weapon, but his usual swagger was gone. The words "tattoo girl" died somewhere in his throat and never came out again. Around the room, the mood shifted. No one had heard the full story. They didn't know what those scars meant, or why a folder with her old radio name sat gathering dust in the armory. But they had seen her today, taking charge when others failed, pulling one of their own out of the storm, carrying a burden she never talked about. Respect began to move in quietly, like the rain easing off after a long night. They still didn't know who Sergeant Leah Monroe really was, but for the first time, they understood one thing clearly. Whatever those numbers on her neck marked, it was not decoration. It was survival carved into skin and carried into every room she walked through. 2 days later, the clouds cleared as if the storm had never happened. The air hummed sharply, and still over the desert training course. A man-made wasteland of wind-blown sand, rusty vehicles and distant targets that shimmered in the sun. It was the last day of sniper evaluation week. Everyone felt it. The silence before the first shot wasn't peace. It was pressure. Monroe stood in the control tower, hood up, headset snug against her ears. Her voice over the radio was even, steady. "Range is hot. Begin first sequence." Below, Commander Cole Harrison led the line of shooters, SEALs, Rangers and a few Marines, through a course designed to test accuracy when tired. Each shooter had to track and hit moving steel targets across the open stretch, considering wind, glare and changing height. At the far end of the course, a small convoy of Humvees idled quietly, engines ticking in the heat. Beside them stood Admiral James Porter, visiting without warning that morning. His silver badges caught the sunlight, and the entire range had stood straighter when he arrived. Even Harrison had swallowed hard before greeting him. Porter said little. He simply crossed his arms and watched. Round after round cracked through the dry air. Steel rang in an uneven rhythm. When Harrison's turn came, he stepped forward confident. His rifle was custom-made, his stance practiced. He wanted this to be the final impression, proof that the SEALs still set the standard. "Shooter 1, ready," he said. "Copy," Monroe replied from the tower. "Target sequence 3. On your mark." He drew a breath, aimed at the first moving target, and squeezed. The rifle roared and jammed. A sharp click, no kickback. He blinked, tried to clear it, worked the bolt, nothing. Sand had gotten into the mechanism. The other shooters glanced his way. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. Harrison's heart pounded. His reputation, his control, his image, all slipping in the seconds it took for him to struggle with the weapon. In the tower, Monroe was already moving. She dropped the headset, leaped down the steps 2 at a time, and crossed the range without a word. Dust swirled around her boots. The line of trainees stepped back without thinking as she passed. When she reached Harrison, she knelt beside him and took the rifle with quiet authority. "May I, sir?" He hesitated, then nodded. Stepping aside, Monroe pulled the bolt assembly free in one motion, tapped it clean, and put it back with a practiced click. She checked the chamber, put the weapon to her shoulder, and aimed at the moving target. For the first time all week, she pulled her hood down. Her braid caught the wind. The light hit her face directly. Sharp features, focused eyes. The faint glint of a sniper's calm that belonged somewhere far more dangerous than a training course. She fired once. The steel target half a mile away rang pure and clear. Admiral Porter, standing near the vehicles, froze mid-breath. His hand dropped from his chest. Eyes locked on her. The voice that came out of him was barely a whisper. "Phantom 6. The name spread across the range like a shockwave. Harrison turned sharply. The trainees glanced at one another, confused. Porter stepped forward slowly, his face pale, his tone mixing disbelief and deep respect. "You were the one who held the tunnels in Fallujah," he said. Every sound died. The wind stopped. The clang of the steel target echoed once more, then faded into complete silence. Monroe lowered the rifle, her breathing steady. For a moment, no one. Then Harrison, who had spent the week doubting, dismissing, and underestimating her, finally understood why the old reports, the folder in the armory, and the quiet respect from Captain Vance all carried the same legendary radio name. Phantom 6 wasn't a story. She was standing right in front of him. No music, no applause, just the sound of the flag snapping once in the afternoon wind, as every man and woman on that range stood frozen, eyes fixed on the woman they'd mocked. The sniper who had survived when others did. The ghost who had walked out of Fallujah and into their training range, as if it were nothing. In that silence, every joke, every doubt, every careless word crumbled to dust. The wind carried a dry hush across the range, stirring only the dust and a few stray empty shell casings at their feet. Monroe stood tall in the silence, the rifle resting loosely against her leg. Her hood was back now, her braid damp with sweat and dust. Eyes fixed ahead. "Just doing my job, sir," she said quietly. Her tone was simple, steady, like the phrase had been practiced over years of carrying it. Admiral James Porter stepped forward first. The silver of his badges flashed once in the sunlight as he came to attention. Then in front of everyone, officers, recruits, instructors, he raised his hand in a salute. It was not slow, not ceremonial. It was real. The air around them seemed to still again. Commander Harrison blinked, stunned. For a moment he didn't move. Then he did the only thing that made sense. He followed suit, his hand moving sharply to salute. One by one the others joined him. Staff Sergeant Lawson, the same man who had once joked about her tattoo, stood rigid now, his hand shaking as he saluted the woman who had just shattered every false idea they'd held. No one spoke. No applause. Just the quiet rhythm of breathing and the faint metallic hum of rifles cooling in the afternoon heat. Porter lowered his hand, but didn't step back. His voice carried across the range, rough with memory. "You all laughed at that tattoo," he said. "But those coordinates," he pointed gently toward the mark on her neck, "they're not decoration. They mark where half a platoon made it home because of her.
Because Phantom 6 didn't walk away when everyone else was gone, the men and women standing there didn't know how to react. Some looked down, others stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Porter's tone softened. Remember that next time you think quiet means weak. The strongest voices on the battlefield aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that keep shooting after the radio goes down. Monroe looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. Her fingers brushed the rifle stock, grounding herself in something familiar, something that didn't need words. Let's finish the course, she said simply. Porter smiled faintly, just a flicker, and gave a nod. The line reset. Targets rotated back into place. Dust hummed low across the course, as each man and woman stepped forward to shoot again. This time under her instruction. Wind left to right, 8 miles an hour. Monroe called, but just half-mil high. Every voice answered in unison now. Copy. Not one correction went ignored. Not one command questioned. Every movement on that line followed her rhythm, quiet, efficient, precise. The sound of each rifle felt coordinated, almost sacred. From the tower the scene no longer looked like training, it looked like When the final target fell, Monroe gave the order to clear weapons and stand down. The men gathered their gear in silence, their eyes steady, their posture sharper. They had walked onto this range mocking a tattoo, and walked off knowing it marked a battlefield they could never imagine surviving. As they were dismissed, Admiral Porter approached one last time. You taught them more than just shooting, he said. She nodded, eyes on the horizon. I just taught them to listen. Behind her, Harrison stood with Lawson. Neither spoke. Both men straightened their backs just a little more, like something unseen had settled on their shoulders, the kind of weight that changes how you wear a uniform forever. And as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the sound of boots faded into silence, not the uneasy silence of mockery, but the earned, heavy quiet of respect. Dusk settled softly over Fort Bragg, painting the horizon in shades of gold and deep blue. The storm-scarred range was quiet now. Wind whispered through the torn flag edges, and the lingering smell of gun oil hung in the air. A small group stood assembled near the command tent. No ceremony music, no cameras, just soldiers gathered beneath a sky that had seen enough. Admiral Porter stepped forward, an award ribbon in hand. His voice carried only as far as it needed to, for exceptional composure under pressure, for leadership, and for reminding us what quiet strength looks like. Sergeant Leah Monroe. Applause wasn't ordered, but it rose anyway, soft and respectful. Monroe stepped forward, still wearing the same faded uniform she'd trained in. The ribbon caught the dying light as the Admiral handed it to her. She nodded her thanks, then instead of pinning it to her chest, slipped it neatly into her pocket. Porter watched her do it, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. You've never been one for showing off, have you? Never needed to be, sir, she replied. When the gathering broke up, Harrison waited until the last few stragglers drifted away before approaching. His boots scraped against the gravel, his voice quiet but urgent. You could have told us who you were. She met his eyes for the first time without any tension. Would it have changed how you listened? He opened his mouth, but there was no good enough answer for that. He only nodded once sharply in respect. A few paces behind him, Lawson approached, his face pale in the fading light. Sergeant, his voice faltered, rough with humility. We were out of line. I was out of line. Monroe studied him for a moment, then gave a faint nod. Just learn from it, she said. That's what the job's for. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes, and stepped back. As the evening deepened, the base lights flickered on one by one, cutting small circles into the dark. The others headed for the mess hall, but Monroe stayed behind. The range stretched empty before her, silent, washed clean by the rain. She walked toward the firing line, the one place she'd always felt steady, and paused by the flagpole. The wind lifted the edge of her hood as she raised a hand to the tattoo at her neck. The ink was still dark, still sharp, but it no longer felt heavy. It wasn't a scar, it wasn't a mark of sorrow anymore. It was memory, coordinates not of loss, but of survival. Respect isn't demanded with words or ranks. It's earned quietly in how you carry the weight of what you've lived through. Some marks aren't decoration, they're history written on skin, remembered in silence. In every uniform, there are stories you'll never see, battles fought long before the laughter, scars hidden beneath the sleeves and memories, carried in silence. Sergeant Leah Monroe never asked for praise. She didn't speak of medals, missions, or the hidden pains that followed her home. She simply showed up, did the work, and reminded everyone that bravery doesn't need an announcement, because real strength isn't loud. It's the quiet choice to stand when no one's watching, to lead when others doubt, and to keep walking long after the noise fades. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep courage alive for generations to come.